In early 19th century, UK had the maximum gold reserves and hence UK sterling pounds was the most trusted and acceptable currency internationally due to strong gold backing. Meaning each sterling pound that you hold guaranteed you certain amount of gold than any other currency. Around 60% of world trade was settled in sterling pounds at that time. During World War I and World War II, US exported huge amount of arms, ammunition and other goods to many countries, as a result of which by the end of World War II, US had accumulated 70% of entire world's gold. At the same time, Great Britain's economy was not in a good condition due to the after effects of the World War II, and to make things worse, Germany, with an intention to defeat sterling pounds, had printed fake currency and circulated it in the market. With the loss of trust in sterling pounds and with no strong gold backing, there was no internationally acceptable financial system in place at this point in time, meaning there was no common currency for international trade. For example, if Japan wants to buy wheat from Ukraine, Ukraine wouldn't accept sterling pounds because it didn't guarantee them any value. Nor Ukraine would accept Japanese yen, because if they accept Japanese yen, it will have value only when they trade back with Japan, since no other country would accept Japanese currency. This situation led to an event in July 1944 where 44 countries came together and signed an agreement called Bretton Woods Agreement. Two things happened in this Bretton Woods Agreement. US asked all the countries to settle their trades in US dollars, and US guarantees 28.5, that is 1 ounce of gold for every 35 US dollars that any country or anybody holds. IMF and World Bank was created, which will loan the countries destroyed during the war to revive their countries, but the loan will be provided in US dollars and the repayment also should be in dollars. At this point in time, all major economies, Germany, UK, Japan, Soviet Union, France, were completely destroyed and the entire world's financial system had collapsed. In this condition, all the countries accepted the proposal. In fact, nobody had any other better option. Sterling pounds was successfully replaced by US dollars as international currency. US very well knew that this setup of US dollars as international currency backed by gold will not go for long, just like sterling pounds. As expected soon, the amount of US dollars held by other countries was no match to the amount of gold held by US, which means US can't keep the promise of 28.3 grams of gold for every 35 US dollars anybody holds. In 1965, the then French President Charles de Gaulle suddenly demanded United States to give them gold in exchange for the dollars under Bretton Woods Agreement. Mr. de Gaulle went to an extent and threatened to withdraw from NATO and also demanded withdrawal of military bases from French territories unless US complied. Later, Germany, Japan, Canada also demanded United States to convert their dollars into gold, as a result of which US gold reserves fell significantly and dollar was devalued. 6 years later, in the year 1971, the then US President Richard Nixon announced a new economic policy, suspending the Bretton Woods gold convertibility. According to the new economic policy, US would no longer give gold in exchange for dollars. So the countries around the world remained with uncovered dollar papers. This was a shock which is famously called as the Nixon shock. The uncovered dollar papers allowed US to print as much money as they wished and then give these printed papers in exchange for goods, services, for commodities, whatever the country needed. Now at this point in time, US dollars could not be exchanged for gold, which means US dollars is just a piece of paper. Now how would US increase the demand for dollars? That's when PetroDollar comes into picture. Washington required a plan which would replace gold with some other commodity. This plan culminated with the concept of PetroDollar and more or less entire world's geopolitical issues since then. In 1974, the United States, represented by the US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, had a series of meetings with Saudi royal family and reached an agreement which stated US would fulfill all their oil needs from Saudi Arabia and would provide all the military aid and equipment. In exchange, the Saudis have to price all their oil sales exclusively in US dollars and would be open to invest their surplus oil proceeds in US debt securities. It was quite an attractive deal to Saudis since all they had to do is price their oil sales exclusively in US dollars. A country which had nothing but endless desert and oil reserves now had one of the strongest military bases. As US expected, many oil producing countries wanted to join this system, and within a year, all OPEC nations agreed to price their oil sales exclusively in US dollars in exchange for the so-called generous offer by United States. Now you can relate why US was so much interested to buy freedom to some Arabic nations by removing rulers who didn't listen to them. We'll come back to this in a moment. Oil is the blood of any economy, pretty much anything that the economy needs. With or without a choice, all the countries in the world had to gather dollar papers if they wanted to buy oil at this point in time. PetroDollar system gave US the possibility to buy oil with a currency it can print at will. At this point in time, US had to just deal with whoever or whatever threatened the PetroDollar system. US were indeed very successful in systematically removing anybody who threatened the PetroDollar system. Libyan strongman Gaddafi publicly pushed for Pan-African gold-backed currency that he would trade for Libyan oil. As we all know, he was killed during the US-backed revolution in 2011. I'm not supporting any dictator, be it Gaddafi or whoever, but what comes to our mind when we hear Gaddafi's name? That Gaddafi is a ruthless dictator and US fought and brought freedom to Libyans from the dictator. Look at these reports and what they say. Libya had the highest standard of living in Africa at the time under Gaddafi. Today Libya is nothing but a barren land. I will leave it to you to conclude what actually America did in Libya. Just a few years before Gaddafi was killed, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein advocated selling oil in euros, and again US clearly scripted the story, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Invaded Iraq and killed Saddam Hussein. Interestingly enough, after Americans invaded, took over Iraq and established a new government, the whole concept of selling oil in euros never surfaced again, nor there were any weapons of mass destruction.
Not washing our hands of what happened in the
You
past.
killed a million people in Iraq.
That is separate.
You killed a million people in Iraq. It's incredible that you have brass neck to be sitting here now urging a not Iraq war.
George.
We should have never been in Iraq. We have destabilized the Middle East. I want to tell you, they lie.
Okay.
They said there were weapons of mass destruction. There were none, and they knew there were none.
If the world starts trading oil in anything other than dollars, the demand for dollar isn't there. For US, this will be worse than the Great Depression. Today, many countries resent this petrodollar system, and the face of this resentment is none other than Vladimir Putin. Whoever wants to finish the petrodollar system is this close. If US goes down, so does the world economy. Even if not, the US will make sure the world goes down along with them. When Russia or Putin invaded Ukraine, do you think all the sanctions on Russia came as a shock? Do you think Russia didn't expect the West would exclude them from SWIFT and impose sanctions? Or do you think the world didn't expect Russia to invade Ukraine if they pushed Ukraine's inclusion to NATO? George Kennan, US foreign policy strategist, John Mearsheimer, leading geopolitical scholar, Jack Matlock, US ambassador to Soviet Union, William Perry, Clinton's defense secretary, Stephen Cohen, famed scholar of Russian studies, Bill Burns, CIA director, Malcolm Fraser, 22nd Prime Minister of Australia, Bob Gates, former US defense secretary. All these experts warned US and the West about Russia's invasion if they push Ukraine's inclusion into NATO. US of course knew Russia would invade Ukraine, and this is exactly what they wanted.
Biden could end this crisis and prevent a war with Russia by doing something very simple, guaranteeing that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. Because if Ukraine became a member of NATO, that would put US and NATO troops directly on the doorstep of Russia, which, as Putin has laid out, would undermine their national security interests. The reality is that it is highly, highly unlikely that Ukraine will ever become a member of NATO anyway. So the question is, why doesn't President Biden and NATO leaders actually just say that and guarantee it? which begs the question of why are we in this position then? If the answer to this and preventing this war from happening is very clear as day, and really it just points to one conclusion that I can see, which is they actually want Russia to invade Ukraine.
US could have easily stopped Russia from invading Ukraine. All they had to do is just do not initiate Ukraine's inclusion to NATO, especially when US was 100% sure Russia wouldn't let this happen at any cost, even at a cost of a nuclear war. In spite of knowing all this, US kept provoking Russia so that Russia invades Ukraine and severe sanctions would be imposed on Russia. The next target is China. US has been providing a lot of military aid to Taiwan, which is really provoking China because China, of course, wants a control over Taiwan. With all this, a bigger war that we all have never seen is inevitable. That's what I feel. With the amount of gold that China is buying since over a year, and with the fact that Russia and China made $260 billion worth of trade in a currency other than dollars, the end of PetroDollar system is very near. So is a bigger war, a much bigger war that we all have seen till date. And a new international financial system, I mean, as early as within the end of this decade probably.
Think is coming is a recession. What your crazy friends might say to you is coming is maybe a depression. You'd be mistaken. Those are lies. What is coming is a collapse of the dollar. You haven't had one of those. We've never experienced the collapse of the dollar, of the world's reserve currency. This will make us Venezuela. Make no mistake. If you want to be prepared, prepare yourself like people should have prepared in Venezuela. Soon, I don't know when, but it will happen overnight. Soon, everything will be collapsing and the banks will close and there will be chaos